Good evening, everyone. It is my great pleasure to attend this very important webinar. I think we are truly at a crossroad in terms of geopolitics, international politics, economic trade, all these very important things. And it is really time for us to stop and pause and to reflect as to what exactly is the mega trend that we are going through. I think the world today is truly in great turmoil. We see the military operations in Ukraine on the one hand. We see NATO being fully mobilized to deal with this war in Ukraine. And we also see, ironically, that the United States is finger pointing at China, saying that while their attention is focused on the Ukrainian war, China, according to the United States, is the biggest challenger and the enemy of the United States. It doesn't seem to make any sense. Allow me to make one point. I think from the US perspective, if it aims to treat Russia on the one hand and China on the other hand as enemies, then this probably will be the worst that the United States will be faced with in dealing with geopolitics in the world of today. Then on the other hand, if we compare China and Russia, even though they had a lot of same common roots before, China and Russia today are very, very different countries in almost all aspects that you can think about. So it is amazing that the United States is very eager to put both China and Russia into the same category, what they call autocracies, vis-a-vis democracies, as they call it. Now, allow me to make several observations. I think from the Chinese perspective, in terms of the political system we are pursuing, we call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. Now, this is very, very important. You may recall that before 1978, China probably achieved the highest level of egalitarianism in human history, but it was egalitarianism of poverty. In China at that time, everyone was equal, but everyone was equally poor. And then Deng Xiaoping came along, and he basically said poverty should not be the characteristic of socialism. Socialism as a political system should generate wealth and a good quality life for the people. And then he need to figure out what's the way out of this huge ideological box that China was put in at the end of the 1970s. Now, what he proclaimed was this socialism with Chinese characteristics. So ever since Deng Xiaoping, China has been focusing on economic development. Development has become the hard truth, and in my term, the soft truth, as well as the smart truth. And I think through development, China has completely transformed itself. Now, by the end of last year, 2021, China's economy, if we use official exchange rate, is already about 80% of that of the United States. But if we use purchasing power parity, the Chinese economy is already about 130% of that of the United States. And in key categories, for example, production of iron and ore, cement, concrete, you name it, it's more than 300 different items, major items. China's production is not only much larger than that of the United States. In many cases, China's production accounted for more than 50% of the global production. So in a sense, I think people need to think about what has generated so much productivity and efficiency in the way that China is dealing with economic development. You know, whether there is any secret recipe, for example, whether whatever China is following has some generality that other countries can also think about or take reference from, for example. And I think this is truly a very US perspective. They claim that China's transformation was because China stole technologies from the United States. China forced the American companies to move from the United States offshore to China, etc. So you hear a lot of horror stories from the mouths of former President Trump, his followers, etc. Even in the administration of the Biden administration, you still hear a lot of these horror stories, is that right? However, I would say China has never forced any American company or developed countries' companies at gunpoint to force them to relocate to China. I think all these Western companies come to China voluntarily to seek profit, not for China, but for their own shareholders. And in this process, they really contributed to globalization. And China, of course, benefited from that. But the key for China was that at the end of the 1970s, Deng Xiaoping led China onto the path of economic development, focusing on growth, focusing on Chinese characteristics, therefore enabling China to seize upon whatever that worked, whatever that contributed to increasing productivity and efficiency. And as a result, we are where we are today in China as the second largest economy in the world, as an economy larger than that of the United States by purchasing power parity. And then in less than another 10 years, the Chinese economy will be larger than that of the United States if we use purchasing power parity as the benchmark. And it is generally expected that by the middle of this century, that is around 2050, for example, the Chinese economy probably will be double the size of that of the United States. So we need to figure out what's the secret recipe. It's not stealing from the United States. It's not in President Trump's term, raping America, for example. It is something that really has worked for China. I would emphasize several points. One is that maintaining domestic stability, because we know for sure that if you cannot maintain your stability, if you cannot put your own house in order, there is no development you can talk about. Now, the other thing is to maintain peace or keeping peace in the world. That doesn't mean that China has the ability to dictate peace for many countries in the world, which may be involved in conflicts of all kinds. But it means that China, to the extent possible, want to promote peace rather than engage in war, and want to stay away from using war as a means to achieve state-to-state objectives. Now, this is very important because if you see what has happened to China, ever since the end of the 1970s, China has never been involved in the war except border clashes with Vietnam at the end of the 1970s and in the 1980s. Ever since then, the Chinese People's Liberation Army has never been involved in a real battle or war and has not fired a single shot outside of China. This is very important. China is the only member of the permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations, which has not fought an active war abroad or engaged in military operations of one kind or another abroad over the past several decades. Now, the other thing is really treating development as the only thing that matters. Deng Xiaoping said, development is the hard truth. And I've added onto that. I said development is not only the hard truth, but the soft truth, as well as the smart truth. Because imagine if China is still weak as it was in 1978, how could you hear any politician in the United States without talking about China whenever they open their mouth? They are now seized upon China. Why? Because they realize that they are faced with one phenomenon that they are not come across for more than 100 years. That is, they need to deal with a country which is larger as an economy than the United States, which has greater growth momentum than that of the United States. And I hope the American decision makers will sooner or later come to terms with this imminent prospect, and then soon will be reality that they need to deal with. Now, from the Chinese perspective, we do not view the United States as an enemy. We do not view the American people as our enemies. We are very eager to get along with the United States as a country and with the American people. However, on the other hand, while we truly put a value on the current international order headed by the United Nations, and we believe that all countries, big or small, need to be treated as equal, we really do not want to be dictated by terms spelled out by other countries, for example, by the United States. Now, the United States now is accusing China as wrecking the values in the world or wrecking the international order. Allow me to emphasize one point. China really does not export ideology or political system or values. Why? Because we truly believe that every country, every nation, every civilization has its own claim to possess and develop its own culture, its own civilization. I think we really need to follow the philosophy that your God is for you and my God is for you. Don't try to impose your God on me, and I will really bring myself to great peril if I try to impose my God to you. So China is not trying to impose its political system onto any other country, and to say the least upon the United States. Now, if we look at the world from the Chinese perspective, this is truly a multilateral world, because we do not want to live in the world to be dictated by the United States. And we do not want to live in the world to be dictated by China, for example. I remember back in 1974, when Deng Xiaoping, before his downfall and bouncing back, for example, he made an important speech at the United Nations in New York. He said, China will never be a superpower. If China wanted to be a superpower, he appealed on countries in the world to unite, to overthrow China as the superpower. Because in the Chinese philosophy, to be a superpower or to be a hegemon is a bad thing, because it involves imposing your will onto other countries. So I think we are in a multilateral world. We need to respect each other. And allow me to emphasize another point. Now, as far as China-US relations are concerned, I think if any country tries to deprive the Chinese nation of their right of economic development, this probably will be the largest crime against humanity in history. So I think we need to respect every country's right to economic development. And if you gain more or I gain more, etc., normally it should be normal. I think we need to be objective about that, rather than politicize such trade issues or economic relations, for example. And I think when China is faced with this maximum pressure upon the country by the United States, and the tariff war has expanded to trade war of all kinds, technology war, and ideology war, geopolitical war of all kinds. And then when we look at the world from the Chinese perspective, we are really facing a moment of truth, that is war or peace. We want to embrace peace. We do not want to be involved in war. And I hope we will really be united to present our case to the international community, to emphasize how important peace is and how important multilateralism is, and how important that we need to really rally behind the United Nations and treating each country as equal, rather than any country has impunity to impose its will, its values, its system onto other countries. Allow me to add another point. China has been promoting this Chinese dream for more than a decade now. And when we talk about Chinese dream, lots of people also mention the American dream. Now, I would say on a personal level, the Chinese dream and the American dream overlap to a large extent, because we do want to have better education. We want to send our kids to a better school. We want to have better medical care, for example, nursing care eventually. To a large extent, it's very similar. But on the state-to-state level, it's very, very different. China respects all the countries as an equal. And I think the United States does not want to do that. I always say the United States is worried that they do not have enough enemies, whereas China is always worried that we do not have enough friends. So I think it is time for us to promote friendship, good neighborhood, and peace, for example, development. And if we focus on development, then between China and the United States, it's not a zero-sum game. China can really lend a very important hand in helping the United States to build up its infrastructure, for example, to build up its supply chains, and to make sure there are more better jobs in the United States, because we truly believe that by promoting trade and economic relations, it is not a win for one country. It normally is a win-win situation for countries involved in normal trade with each other. I will stop here for the moment. I want to emphasize that I'm a true believer in multilateralism, and I want me and my future generations to live in a world with multilateralism where countries and cultures of all kinds should be dealt with as equals, rather than we allow any country to dictate its terms onto the rest of the world. Thank you very much.